Welcome back to the Law News Network. I'm your host, Caroline Polisi, and we have a very special segment for you this afternoon. Michel Bryant is here with me to break down the latest revelations in the Harvey Weinstein case.
Boy.
It just keeps getting worse and worse.
It really does.
I mean, it's almost mind-boggling. So, okay, guys, the latest revelations coming out of the New Yorker. Ronan Farrow published a second bombshell article in the New Yorker this week, which lays forth claims that Weinstein actually engaged these private intelligence agencies like Kroll and Black Cube to really conduct a sinister campaign against his accusers to silence them, to try to kill that New York Times story. Remember, that was the first story that came out. It broke shortly before Ronan Farrow's first article in the New Yorker. But the Times story really opening the floodgates to this Me Too campaign. And since that Times story came out, boy, oh boy, have the floodgates been opening, not only against Harvey Weinstein, but against a slew of other high-profile male celebrities. I mean, let's just talk a little bit about that, Michael. I mean, it's overwhelming.
I mean, the cliche of the casting couch has been around forever, but we have never seen such graphic examples of what that really has meant in Hollywood for years. I mean, I was a correspondent for Extra for 5 years, so I was in that milieu. Right. And so you knew about it. It was, wasn't specific. It wasn't targeted at anybody as it has been now, but it was not a surprise when these stories started coming out.
And what I love about this story, obviously it's painful for many people to have to recount, but I love the fact that not only is it spilling over into, I mean, it's not only in Hollywood now that we're seeing it spill over into sort of mainstream society with the Me Too campaign. I think it's sort of brilliant and empowering.
And it's about time.
Right.
I mean, I've done, when I was practicing in California, sexual harassment cases were one of the major cases I covered on the civil level. But we would always have to look into the case when it was being first reviewed to find out if, in fact, maybe there was some criminal aspect to it. And then we'd move forward with whatever the civil matter might be. But the fact is, for every one of these outrageous cases, and we put them in the sexual harassment category, let's face it, in most cases they're crimes.
Yep.
It's criminal behavior. It's not harassment, and I think there's a huge difference. For every case of this kind, there are thousands of workers in offices, male and female, who are being harassed, who are being in a hostile work environment for things that are happening that are wrong, but are far less egregious than the criminal level that we're hearing these allegations relate to. So
right.
It's about time.
Yeah, and as our viewers will remember, we had Lisa Bloom on this program talking with LawNewz's editor-in-chief Rachel Stockman initially once the Times story broke. And at that point, sort of the party line, she was stating that this was sort of bad behavior in the workplace. Nothing like now, since the New Yorker article has been coming out, and since we see now that Cy Vance is getting ready, apparently, to bring an indictment to a grand jury. Those are the rumors that we're hearing. What do you think?
I know, and the first thing you think is the alleged victim is De La Huerta.
Yes, Paz de la Huerta.
Huerta.
Can we get a picture of her up? There she is.
She, I think she worked on a movie with Harvey Weinstein.
Boardwalk Empire.
Yeah, the show, and
right.
then she did, I think, Cider House Rules back when she was a youngster, 14, but these allegations relate to when she was 26. And so you think, okay, it was 2010, that's almost 8 years ago. What's the first thing you think? It's a statute of limitations problem. So New York has gone a long way to correct that problem when a sexual offense rises to a certain level. In this case, first-degree rape. There are 3 degrees of rape, and they involve the conduct that took place during the crime. If they tried to get Mr. Weinstein for second or third degree, it's a loser because the 5-year statute of limitations has long run. So their only shot is first degree.
Okay, so what are the elements of the first degree?
The critical element, first of all, consent's going to be a complete defense
yes.
to any of these things. So if he could somehow prove consent, these are he said, she said type stories. So how do you corroborate either one? Both sides have a problem.
And consent's really an issue. We saw in the Bill Cosby case, it's an issue in every single one of these cases where the victims knew the perpetrator and had this sort of power dynamic relationship. The consent, it always comes down to, that's always what these men argue, that the consent was there.
Of course, and sometimes the argument is so ridiculous because the alleged consent was to things who
right.
people would never consent to.
Exactly.
So let's assume there's no valid defense. The key element for first degree is forcible compulsion.
Okay.
Okay, now the law breaks that down even further, and I can't memorize that.
Yeah,
so I'm going to read it to you.
Thank you.
Forcible compulsion means to compel either by physical force, that makes perfect sense, or by threat, express or implied, which places a person in fear of immediate death or physical injury to himself or herself or another person, or in fear that he, she, or another person will immediately be kidnapped. Very interesting little wrinkle to the definition. So in this particular case, I know she's alleging that he basically forced her into her own apartment or a room within her own apartment.
Just for our viewers, let's go over the specific allegations that Ms. De La Huerta is alleging. She told CBS News, apparently, that she was first raped in October 2010 after Weinstein gave her a ride home from a party. She then says, actually, that Weinstein raped her 2 months later in her apartment. She said she had been drinking. She was not in a condition to give consent. So, you know, as we were talking a little bit off camera, the sort of second rape is more complicated, I think, than the first. But again, Cy Vance only has to charge one incident. He could just do away with the second. For all the jury knows, they may not ever hear about the second sexual encounter. And I think if I were prosecutors, I would not talk about that.
No, I think because of the fact pattern, and as we understand it, it was a subsequent meeting where he just showed up in the lobby of her building, and the next thing you know, she alleges he's in the apartment and is raped again. I think once you have that happen to you, as she describes the first time in October of 2010, you're probably on a little heightened alert.
Right.
And how he gets beyond the drop into the apartment lobby, into the apartment and beyond, is tougher for a jury to kind of, you know, excuse, I guess, or embrace. They're going to think, well, how could that happen? How could she be that careless, knowing what happened before? So obviously it could have happened exactly as she lays it out. But it's harder to sell that when and I agree with you. Just don't worry about that one.
Yeah.
You know, if you're going to get the first one in with the facts you got and the facts you like, go with that one.
And apparently, you know, all the rumors coming out of Cy Vance's team and the NYPD are that they've got some pretty strong evidence in this case. I have to talk about the fact that Cy Vance took a lot of heat for not pursuing that 2015 charge with Ambra Gutierrez. Can we get a picture of her up on the screen? That's Ambra Gutierrez, and if you'll remember that first New Yorker article that came out with Ronan Farrow, they released a voice recording of an NYPD sting operation in which Ms. Gutierrez cooperated with the NYPD to obtain incredibly incriminating recording of Mr. Weinstein. Apparently, after the alleged incident occurred, she went back to his hotel room. We hear him on the tape pleading with her to come back into his hotel room, saying, you know, don't embarrass me, sweetie. You know, I'm famous. People know who I am. You gotta help me out here. Just disgusting. And actually admitting to groping her the previous day. Why?
Not enough. Not enough.
What? And that's the party line.
Yeah,
that's what Cy Vance came out saying in a very opaque statement, that there simply wasn't. I mean, look, the NYPD and the DA's office sort of played the blame game, each sort of blaming the other. But do you think that there was enough to prosecute that crime?
Certainly. I mean, conviction, you know, who knows? But certainly enough to bring the charges and to pursue the case. And maybe now it's sort of a, you know, pendulum is swinging the other way, and we have to make up for that little problem from the last time.
Right. Well, it's not surprising that news of this sort of second chance indictment came on Election Day for Cy Vance. I think he's really trying to to gain some credibility in the eyes of the public here. When it came out that he hadn't pursued charges in the first case.
Arguably, he had better evidence with that case.
I agree.
Now, because these cases always come down to corroboration. Otherwise, it is purely a he said, she said. And I know sources are suggesting that there was corroboration that came from a friend of Ms. De La Huerta. I mean, who knows? I mean, who knows where it's going to come from? But that's going to be the sticking point. If you can get past consent, is there corroboration?
Right. Now, Weinstein is in Arizona, apparently, at a treatment center. So take us through what has to happen next week, potentially, to cuff him. Well,
they're going to have to get a warrant that's issued by an Arizona jurisdiction to bring him in and get, you know, a loosely based extradition. You know,
Okay,
they got to get him back here. But, you know, I think about it, and I think, is this guy going to pull a Roman Polanski?
Yeah,
you know?
I was thinking the same thing.
He's certainly got the means to do it. He could certainly find a country without extradition to the U.S. and probably live just fine.
Right, right. Interesting. I wonder if people have eyes. I mean, all eyes will be watching,
I'm
obviously.
sure there are people
So
watching him in the airport. Yeah.
Might be difficult.
Yeah.
Interesting. So I want to sort of move a little bit to, you know, we're talking about the Amber Gutierrez case. One of the things that the New Yorker article made clear was that a reason apparently that the DA didn't go after that prosecution was because apparently she lacked some credibility. She had some credibility issues. There was a prior issue with her past, whatever. But a lot of stories were getting leaked at the time to the Post about Ms. Gutierrez. And now, lo and behold, in this second New Yorker article that came out reporting by Ronan Farrow, Harvey Weinstein employed a slew of spies, actually, ex-Israeli intelligence agents,
Mossad,
to do his bidding.
You know, the story we've always heard from those who have been the subject of these allegations are payoffs. You know, that's usually the way it goes. It's cliche. You know, there's a lot of money handed over in the Fox cases. So much money was paid to buy silence, arguably. We won't really know for sure because they, in fact, became silent. It worked. This is the first time I can recall ever hearing somebody create some sort of intelligence bureau just to smear the people making the allegations or people reporting the allegations. It went beyond just the alleged victims. It went to people reporting.
Which is really scary. Some of the reporters stated that they sort of feared for their safety to the point where they were fearful. This again, I use the word sinister because it really does feel quite sinister. Specifically, you know, Rose McGowan has been a very outspoken accuser of Mr. Weinstein's. Her story just remarkable, unbelievable about how this undercover operative really embedded herself into Ms. McGowan's life over the course of a year, gaining her trust under a false pretense in order to really get information about this forthcoming book that she was going to publish, is going to set to publish in January, called Brave, and sort of to sniff around to see.
And record conversations.
Yes. Talk to us about that, because a lot of people are asking, is that legal?
That's what's interesting when I'm going back to some of these older things I used to do back in the day. When I worked with Extra in a consumer unit division there, we would come to New York to do stories because it's a one-party state.
Right.
One-party state means, thank you, thank you. One-party state simply means that if I'm recording you and I'm okay with that recording, I'm the one party. That's all I need is me. So it's a bizarre rule. In most other states, it's two-party or more. And that's why, you know, California, you can't do it. And I can't remember the state breakdown, but in many states, you just can't do it. You need both people to consent. Well, in New York, you don't. So I could bug anybody I want whenever I want, as long as I haven't broken any sort of trespass laws or anything else.
Right.
So that's what she did.
And you know, a lot of people are asking about these other tactics. I mean, this is pretty intense. I just want to let our viewers know sort of the allegation by Rose McGowan is that in May of 2017, she received an email from a literary agency introducing her to a woman who identified herself as Diana Phillip. And she was the deputy head of sustainable and responsible investments at a Rubin Capital Partners, which was a London-based wealth management firm. Now, Phillip apparently told McGowan that she was launching an initiative to combat discrimination against women in the workplace and asked Ms. McGowan to speak at a gala kickoff later that year. And eventually, the two became friends. And it turns out that this woman was none other than an undercover agent.
Yes, a spy.
A spy.
Yes.
I mean, it's like out of a Harvey Weinstein movie. Is that legal?
Well, I mean, she's certainly putting herself out there as something other than what she is.
Right.
Okay. So what is she gaining from this fraud? You know, I mean, what's the end game? Is that in and of itself a crime? Probably not. I mean, and there's no specific connection to a damage created by the fraud. It's just slimy.
That's where I come out. I mean, it's legal, but it's highly unethical, immoral, and just dirty, really. Now, where we get into sort of the legal case here, you know, Harvey Weinstein's famous attorney, David Boies, sort of has been standing behind him all this time. Now it comes out that it was actually Boyes and his firm that contracted with Black Cube, sort of becoming the third-party intermediary so that Weinstein's fingerprints wouldn't be on this. What do you think about that?
I mean, that just, this back channel payment, and of course, David Boyes says, well, I would never do that again, not knowing who the third parties were. He basically said, we provided the money. It was funneled through us.
He said, he made a point of saying, we didn't pick this agency. We merely provided a service to our client, Mr. Weinstein.
Yes.
And in retrospect, he's now saying that was a mistake.
It's so easy when you're caught to have regrets.
Right.
You know what they say, do it and then apologize later. Well, that's what he's done.
Right.
And they wrote him a check, or there was wire transfers of $100,000 from
I think a
Harvey.
total invoice of $600,000.
Yes, and unclear whether that was ever paid, but that was the bill.
Right.
So at least $100 went through David Boyes' office innocently. He just funneled the money, no questions asked. See you later.
Right.
This is a guy that has a tremendous reputation.
Yeah.
A little dirtied now.
Yeah, and the New Yorker actually published one of those Black Cube contracts too, which David Boyes himself signed off on. And the point of the contract, and in fact, Black Cube was going to receive monetary incentives if they could obtain information leading to the killing of this now infamous New York Times story, which sort of blew the lid off of this whole thing. So they were sniffing around, they knew the story was coming out, and they were doing everything they could to silence them. David Boyes, by the way, representing the Times at the time as well. I mean, you just can't make this stuff up.
And they were successful in killing some stories. I know
they were?
The National Enquirer, or one of its arms,
That's right.
was going to do a story, and in fact became the subject of this kind of witch hunt.
That's right.
And they killed a story.
They got Kroll involved too, another very well-known private intelligence agency. It's just shocking that the magnitude, but in my line of work, I mean, when you have wealthy clients that are willing to pay for these types of services do exist.
Of course. And I guess if you can maintain enough distance that you are not encouraging illegal activity in what you do, if you're just paying from your client to a vendor, you're trying to keep yourself as clean as you can.
Right. And many people are making the point that contracting it through Boyes Schiller actually shields it in a way because it's now attorney-client privileged, right? Because it's the lawyer that is sharing sort of the information with the client. So it adds sort of a double layer of protection against that information and allows this kind of practice to be really in the shadows of. It's just devastating. But where do you see this case going in terms of, we're hearing that he's going to be charged in New York, but what do you think Weinstein's future holds?
Boy, professionally dead. We know that. So now let's look at, as a private citizen, as a free man, what's he got to look forward to? I would not be surprised if he's charged. I would not be surprised if they pursue the prosecution to a point at which it makes sense to resolve it. Maybe that's a lesser charge, one that they couldn't get because of the statute of limitations, but certainly if he will agree to a plea, that's okay. If the prosecutor can get him to do second or third degree, and will he do jail time? I seriously doubt it. I really do.
Really?
I just think.
You don't think the public outrage is high enough that we could see a conviction and jail time?
I don't think this would ever go to trial, to be honest with you. Unless they've got corroboration that is so unusual in cases like this, when it's usually the only two people involved are the he and the she said.
Okay, but it's not. I have to bring us back to Bill Cosby, because there you had a parade of women. The prosecution wanted to bring in sort of other act evidence in an effort to show a pattern of practice.
And you can do that.
Right.
That's not corroboration, though.
No, it's not. But it's not in our world. But in the real world, for the
no
jurors,
doubt about it.
that is corroboration.
No doubt about it. And once you get the pattern evidence in as prior bad acts, which are normally excluded,
right, highly prejudicial.
It is deadly.
Yep.
It's
deadly. Devastating.
Yeah. And again, what's the key to pattern evidence for prior bad acts? Similarity. It's almost like a signature crime. If you're a burglar,
the MO,
the burglar always leaves water in the sink. And so I remember an old law school case story about that. Who does
The wet
that?
bandits.
There
right?
you go.
Okay.
So that was how they linked prior bad acts to
Right.
this. Well, this, we're talking the whole shower thing and
Right.
the robe and the. I
Right.
mean, they're very specific, odd things.
Which is
that
why
tie
I
these
think.
bad acts.
Which is why I think that the prosecution could make a pretty strong theory to get in some of these.
And here's why I think that won't go to trial, just because of that. I think that's the kind of leverage that will be used to get him to take something less than first-degree rape.
Yeah, but do you think that they're going to give him a plea deal that doesn't include jail time?
I don't know.
I don't see that.
I would be surprised. I really would.
Okay, well, I'm going to have you back on
Okay.
when this
When they're
case
cuffing
goes to,
him and taking
and
him
we're going
away.
to see, because
Okay.
I challenge you, so I
Okay.
want to see.
We'll make a note of that.
Exactly, we'll place a bet. Michael, it's always a pleasure to have you
My
on the
pleasure.
show.
Fun.
Thank you for being with us here today.